right, Carlton King, the former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in jihadi organisation. My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection. But as you know, and regular listeners know that very, very well, what we actually do is we look at the world of geopolitics from the macro and from the micro. So we want to see it at its largest and at its smallest and see everything that it relates to. And in the last 2 weeks, what I've done is I've actually done some solo work, because oftentimes I do work with two colleagues, one Dr. Rachel Taylor and the other Fergus Isaac. And those pieces of work generally go to a perspective whereby we can look at things from the area of not just geopolitics in the round and intelligence, but also what I tend to try and do with those two ladies is look at things from a medical perspective using Dr. Taylor, and then also from a media perspective using Fergus Isaac, both of which today are ultra important. But in the last 2 weeks, what I've been doing is looking at things more from an intelligence security perspective. And today is no exception. Why is that the case? Because we are once again in a phase of world politics whereby things are getting very dangerous in many different arenas. Now, what I did first before, as I looked at the attack by the United States on the Maduro government and kidnapping of Maduro in Venezuela. So that was done some 2 weeks ago. Last week, I looked at Greenland and the claims of President Trump, what he wanted to do with that. And as we know, what's been happening this week has been Davos. And if you listen to the mass media, you'll hear that Davos has been going on, where the World Economic Forum, where basically the powerful come together, be they business, be they politicians, or be they some type of entrepreneur with some business success, of course. That's what you can really say. And then, so this week what I want to do is I want to look at a little bit of the fallout of the World Economic Forum, and just very, very quickly on that, because that's not the main focus. But the main focus will be the movement to war in Iran. Now, the reality is that I've been watching this for a couple of weeks now, and frankly, at one stage it looked like we were going to have something coming already, which is why on a couple of occasions I've already mentioned it within those other two episodes which I've done. But now I think we may be coming to it, not because of Israel's insistence for it at this particular moment, because I think Israel may well be a holdback on this particular issue at this particular time, but because of President Trump potentially needing a win. So, and as I'd always said, and those who saw me, listen to me some months ago now, probably when Trump first came into power, I spoke about the fact that President Trump is extremely transactional, that he is mafiosa in his way of dealing with things, sort of New York mafiosa. So basically what you do is you put a very heavy hit on the individual. You say, this is what can happen to you if you don't do what I say. This is what I've got ringed around you, all my mafia guys around with their machine guns. And then you give them an opportunity to kind of do what you want them to do, and then you release that very strong and tight grip you've got on them. So I felt that, Trump's build-ups in a couple of places on Greenland, etc., show that, you put the masses there, the mass aspect there, and then you draw it back. Now, as I said with Greenland last week, that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a takeover of Greenland by the US. It's already begun. What I mean is, it's just the form that it takes. So that's where we are with the Greenland issue. And also, I think what Trump did with Greenland was he also got a feel for how weak, I was going to say allies. I'm not, running around to try and find the right word. No, I know what the word is. Vassals. So his vassals in Europe, what they will accept before somebody stands up and says, enough is enough. So this is where we are. I think that what happened is that he, as I said, like that mafia boss, was trying to measure not only what Denmark would accept in Greenland, but what the vassals in Europe will accept. That's both in the European Union, which is powerful, so really shouldn't necessarily require the vassal perspective, because frankly, economically, it can hold its own if it did the right things. It's obviously scarred itself massively and scored an own goal in the fact that it has not been taking Russian oil at the Russian oil prices. Actually, shall we be realistic about it? It has been taking Russian oil the whole time. It knows it has, because it's been taking that Russian oil directly from India. Right? That's what it's been doing. It's just that it's been paying 1.5 times, 2 times more than it would if it took it directly from Russia, particularly the Germans. And then you've got to transport it, whereas the pipeline just brought the oil directly to it without the transportation process. So for the Germans, it was a win-win-win-win. Yes, a triple win, because then what the Germans were already doing was selling off some of that Russian oil, which it made an agreement with the Russians for at a very cheap price. It would sell it off to other European partners. Yeah. Now, of course, it's having to buy all that oil from 2 sources primarily. One, as I said, Indian oil. Well, it's taking time to get there because they're transporting it via tankers. And then the second one is United States. So the United States has done a win-win. It's actually said destroyed the pipeline that was providing very cheap gas and oil to the United States, and then to Europe, including in particular Germany, where it then moved on, and then it now has the Germans buying its liquid petroleum gas from the Americans at extremely expensive prices. I believe somebody said 4 times as much as they were paying for Russian oil. So it's got them. And indeed, on top of that, the Germans even had to build a whole complex to take the liquid petroleum gas as well. So it's just a win-win for the American. And these are the sorts of things Trump likes, because he's a businessman. And actually, within that, his own personal wealth over the last year has grown by, and I'm going to say it, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, has grown by $1 billion. Now, there's always a question as to whether Trump was a billionaire, whether he was as wealthy as he says he was. But now, since he's been in power in the White House, he's made sure that he's wealthy. And he's doing deals with other people and with his family, Kushner comes to mind as one, to make sure that the wealth keeps flowing in. So the corruption is massive. He's $1 billion at least more or wealthier than he was previously. So this man is not doing things without a thought through process. It is. The problem is that I guess he, but particularly I would say the Europeans, who are not vassal-like when it comes to the Ukraine, because they're not doing what Trump wants them to on the Ukraine, because they've invested so much in the Ukraine that they know when, and it is a when, not an if, the Ukraine loses, then they will have to basically prove to their public why they felt the Ukraine couldn't be allowed to fall, and why, and this is the point I'm going to make, and why they can now live with Russia in the Ukraine. And to be fair, I think the Europeans now want Russia to take the whole of Ukraine to be able to turn around and say, see, this is what he always wanted to do. When actually, and those of you who listen to the programme regularly know that when the Ukraine war first happened some 3-4 years ago, I actually articulated what President Putin wanted, and that was stability in the area. Then as the war went on, I said, right, now he's going to have to take the 3 oblasts to make them Russian, where the vast majority of Russian speakers are. And that's what's been done already. Now you're pushing him to take Odessa, and this is the European allies. And next, he'll be pushed to take Kiev. Now, I'll tell you once and for all, he does not want to take Kiev. He probably now thinks it's sensible to take Odessa. Kiev he doesn't want. Why? Dead simple. And the whole of that western Ukraine onwards. Why? Because the eastern Ukraine are Russian speakers, Russian people, and the vast majority of them are happy. Well, not guessing the vast majority are happy. He's actually put elections in place, and he's seen that the Russian speakers are happy to be part of Russia proper. And they are now, and that's not going away. That is where it's going to stay. But the Western Ukrainians are not Russian speakers, are not of Russian stock, the Slavic stock like Russians, which is why he's been easy on them the whole time. But they're not Russian stock, you can argue. And I hate using these sort of, I guess you could argue they are old-fashioned, imperialistic, racial and ethnic terminologies, where we split up the people into the Russian people, the Russian stock and the stock and all that sort of business. But it still does play. So that's why I mention it in that way. So what I'm saying is that he's happy to take the parts of the Ukraine, which, because of course, as we all know, the Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, and before that, the Ukraine was part of the Tsarist empires of Russia. So forever and a day, Ukraine has been part of Russia for 300, 400, 500 years. There's a lot of interconnectability. So you can see that for the vast majority of people, particularly in the eastern regions where they are Russians and see themselves as being of Russian heritage, that it's not a big take for Russia to take that, because the insurgency aspects won't be coming from those people in those areas. Right, Western Ukraine is completely different. If he takes Kiev, he will have an insurgency on his hands forever and a day. And that's what the Europeans like. They will like there to be an insurgency, even though the dangers of there being a continued insurgency against Russia could at any stage lead to war with NATO, because NATO, at least the European part of NATO, if the Americans take away and leave it, NATO will be fighting in some way, shape or means to keep trying to degrade Russia in any way it can. And that terminology I use purposefully because that is the terminology that a British Prime Minister, Liz Truss, used when she stated the reason for the United Kingdom being involved in the conflict in the Ukraine. She made it very clear, because I don't think Liz is probably the brightest amongst us, and she said, we are interested in degrading Russia. That's the United Kingdom's position. So she made it very clear. She didn't say we're interested in saving the people of the Ukraine. No, she said we're interested in degrading Russia. That other clown, and I'm going to say it and I shouldn't because he was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, who frankly, we're talking at this particular time about President Trump not being respectful to the 457 dead British servicemen, generally, and women who died in Afghanistan. Well, when you get a Prime Minister like Boris Johnson, who turned around and was totally and utterly disrespectful to the 28 million, repeat, 28 million Russian dead, actually Soviet dead in the Second World War, and because of the way that Stalin was, and I'm no fan of Stalin, we kind of know, or at least feel, most historians do, that figure of 28 million is not true. That figure probably jumps up to 30, 35, 40 million Soviet citizens dead due to the German invasion in Operation in Fallweis, Operation Barbarossa. I was going to be Deutsch then for a second, Operation Barbarossa. That conflict, that operation, that cost the Soviet people 40 million dead. Let's say the 28 million, because let's use the official figures which were given under perestroika, because previously it was only ever given as 20 million. It was risen under Gorbachev to try and be truthful, glasnost, openness, perestroika, telling the truth, and he said 28 million. Now, as I said, I believe it's much more than that. But, and so do other historians, but so be it. Let's go with their figures, 28 million, and take into account that we, the United Kingdom, and its colonies, not talking about, and I've mentioned this before, so I'll say it again, but not talking about the white Commonwealth, okay, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, and Australia, not talking about their dead, which together make up around the figure of 70,000, if that, dead. And then, of course, in addition to the white Commonwealth, India also sat alone as a self-running part of empire, run by the British Raj, of course. So that's the figures of Indian dead are not included in the United Kingdom dead, nor is Singapore, Malaysia, which lost 100,000 alone, so more than the white Commonwealth, and India, which, if you count the starvation, probably lost something in the rear of 3 million dead in the Second World War. So our losses, Great Britain's losses were 450,000. So for the President of Great Britain, who lost 450,000 in the Second World War, for him to suggest that the Second World War was won by Great Britain and won by the United States, which also lost around about 450,000 soldiers generally. So together, the figures are 450,000 each, Great Britain and the United States. So add that up and we get less than a million. And when you see a country that lost 28 million, and we haven't even spoken about China, which lost 30 million, when you start putting those figures together, because I was just talking about the European losses, and the Americans, of course, and then our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, stands up at the time of reflection of ceremonies for the 80 years losses of that war, and he turns around and suggests that Russia did nothing, then, of course, if we can see our anger for the President of the United States, Trump, saying what he said about 457 deaths, what do you think the Russians felt? And to be fair, the rest of the Soviet Union states, which lost many people, Belarus, definitely the people from the Uzbeks, Azeris, etc., who lost many people in the war as well. What do you think they felt when this statement was made? So that's just contextualizing that. And so what I want to get past is the fact that people may turn and say, oh, this fellow only thinks about Russians. No, what I think about is being sensible, fair, understanding, and knowing the history. Because once you know your history, nobody can fool you. So why do I mention all of this when I'm talking about Iran? Because what I want to do is I want to play some, today again, play a few clips of other individuals, and then I want to talk about what those clips actually mean, and some of the nuance that may have been left from those clips as we relate it to Iran. But first and foremost, whilst we stay on Greenland, I want to play a couple of clips from powerful Americans. One, a governor of California, which California, if it were a country in its own right, would be the 8th most powerful country in the world. So the governor of California is a powerful politician, Gavin Newsom. And then I want to play you a clip from a powerful American senator. So just those two clips I want to play, Greenland, and then I want to move on to Iran. So the first aspect of what I want to play for you in this first clip will actually talk about the mental health of Donald Trump. Obviously, earlier on in this pod, what I've spoken about is his sort of mafiosa type tactic that he uses. And I'm imagining that he's always used that tactic in business, in New York, where it's basically the thing you do, overpressure people. But of course, he's now doing it on a world stage, which is completely different. And the reason why I think he's doing that is Dr. Rachel and I wrote a book quite recently, which we spoke about, in which it speaks about to men, and men often don't understand this. We spoke about the andropause, which is the male menopause. And one of the things that, well, there's several aspects, and Dr. Rachel goes into them in the book, superbly. And by the way, I've put the connection to the book in the write-up, so you can see it in the write-up. It basically explains what the male menopause is. So as I said, I'll put it in the write-up below. But the book, if you don't read the write-up, I know some people don't, is basically called Male Menopause, The Hidden Crisis, Unmasking the Male Menopausal Link Between Falling Libido, Fatigue, Mental Illness, Conflict and Suicide. Having just articulated the title, and we look at this situation from the geopolitical perspective, at least I look at it from the perspective of intelligence and security, and Dr. Rachel obviously looks at the medical aspect of it, including the behavioural situations. Does this not ring a bell to you as it regards a certain politician? So with that in mind, what I want to do is play you the clip, which obviously a senator in the United States has also taken the perspective from that. Because what you'll find is, within the male menopause, and you lose your testosterone, etc. And as I said, if you read the book, you'll understand what we're talking about. The person who suffers from the male menopause in this way tends to compensate for these losses. Does that ring a bell to you?
Mental health concern for you after some of the things that he's been saying in Europe?
Well, he said a lot of crazy today in Davos. I think it's time to take the keys away from Grandpa. He doesn't seem like he's all there. I'm not naive about what I've said this morning and how that will be reflected in the official White House account. I'm not naive about the fact that he threatened to prosecute the Fed chief in the United States of America, who's literally going after his enemies with the FBI and the DOJ, these power ministries. I'm not naive about any of this. I'm not naive about the corruption and the graft at scale we've never seen in American history. I'm not naive about folks writing billion-dollar checks to Witkoff, to Jared Kushner, for this new peace deal they're announcing today. I'm not naive about the fact that the President of the United States made $1.5 billion+ in the last 12 months, personally. How in the hell are we putting up with?
So that clip that I played you there, those two clips that I played you together, I've spliced them together, show two different, as I said prior to the clips, powerful American politicians. So what I'm saying is that Donald Trump's problems are not known, if you like the oxymoron, and not known. They are known, and they're known to people in the political arena. But that's exactly the same with Biden. People knew that Biden had basically dementia and that he couldn't hold two words together. People knew that. So isn't there a democratic deficit there? Isn't there a structural deficit in the way that the United States functions, that people can see mental health, but nobody wishes to tackle it within the political system? There is a problem there. And then, of course, the other problem picked up by Governor Newsom is when he's talking about the graft entailed in it. And as I mentioned before, I said $1 billion. I guess I'm being conservative. He's saying $1.5 billion. Now, my billions researched, I guess his $1.5 billion could be even more researched, and he could have the correct figures in terms of, frankly, what the President of the United States, Trump, has earned from his role as the President of the United States. And I'm laughing as I'm saying that because he's earned it from his role as the President of the United States. You're not meant to do that. You're meant to be paid a salary. But anyway, hey, that's the problem for the United States, and the United States listeners will have to consider that themselves. The next clip that I want to play you reverberates around the issues pertaining to Iran and where we're going. And I'm going to play you two clips as well because I want to give you the overview. But first of all, from the Davos conference, I want to give you the position. Head man at the Treasury, Scott Bessent. And Scott Bessent basically spoke at Davos as part of the US's powerful delegation that was there. And I want to play you a clip about what he said as it relates to Iran. And I think you'll find this very, very interesting.
What do you want to say about sanctions? Something else you've been working on, of course. What are you planning there in terms of Iran and the impact there? Do sanctions actually work? And the same question with regard to 500% secondary sanctions or tariffs on countries who purchase energy products from Russia.
Okay, so two things there. There are Treasury sanctions, and if you look at a speech that I gave at the Economic Club of New York last March, I said that I believe the Iranian currency was on the verge of collapse, that if I were an Iranian citizen, I would take my money out. President Trump ordered Treasury and our OFAC division, Office of Foreign Asset Control, to put maximum pressure on Iran, and it's worked. Because in December, their economy collapsed. We saw a major bank go under. The central bank has started to print money. There is a dollar shortage. They are not able to get imports. And this is why the people took to the street. So this is economic statecraft. No shots fired. And things are moving in a very positive way here.
Colonel, I find this repellent. Your thoughts, please.
I do too. Economic statecraft, Mr. Secretary, I would call it war crimes. You are using the power of your economy and your system to kill people. Do you recall when Madeleine Albright was asked a question? I think she was out of the Secretariat, but not by long. Did she know that 500,000 Iraqi children died during our sanctions period after the first war? And she said, yeah, I know that. I think it was worth it. I think that was a reprehensible statement, just like I think Scott Bessent is a reprehensible individual. He's Steve Miller with a dollar sign on his forehead.
So what do we have there? What was being said by Scott there? What was his position there? Basically what he was saying is, he was saying that the people who came out onto the street in Iran came out onto the street because we, the United States, starved them of the monies they needed to live their lives. So that in itself is bankrupt. He's not turning around saying they came out on the street because they hated the system that's in place in Iran. No, it's not that he even said that it's not the religious system, it's that they have incorrectly worked the economy into the ground. No, he said it very clear. We, the United States, we have destroyed their economy. That's why the people are out on the streets. Now, what he didn't add to that, and what I articulated last week to you, so I'm not going to go over it, is then that the Mossad, CIA, potentially us, also carried out activities via agents, and that's people whom we've turned to carry out their actions, on the streets, and insurgents that we put in there, the West, let's just use the term the West, has put in there with Israel to then undermine the state of Iran and to collapse it from the inside out, utilising the populace and causing fizzes within that society and fractures. So that's what was done, in addition to basically destroying their economy. Now, the other thing that I will say, if you can think back, people who've been listening for a long time, if you think back, I said that when the West utilised the SWIFT system to punish Russia, that this would be the worst thing that the West ever did because it will come back to play and haunt them. Well, again, the United States hasn't learned, has it? SIPS has been created by BRICS, really the Chinese, and SIPS is now being used, slowly but surely being used. PAPS is being used which is another payment system, is now being used throughout the whole of Africa. Why? Because everybody begins to see that if you make the United States angry, they will collapse your economy. So that means that the dollar that was once high and mighty and couldn't be touched and was basically the same as the gold standard for most people, the petrodollar is now done. They've overdone it. They've basically destroyed the economic power base overnight, much quicker than I ever thought would happen. And if you don't watch it, what will happen next is people will start calling in the US debt like any other country, because it will not be the reserve currency only. There'll be other currencies which are challenging and payment processes which are challenging it. And economically, this will be the downfall of the United States. And again, Scott Bessel has just shown to me that he's learnt nothing from the debacle that was brought into place under the Biden system, I must admit. And now you find that Belgium, that I guess kind of supposedly runs, but run by an American, to be fair, that kind of runs the payment system, is basically saying now, oh, this is wrong, don't do this. So Belgium is feeling what's going to happen, right? So this is what I'm saying. You've got to be very careful what you do economically, but then to brag about it. And of course, I've had people say to me, and somebody wrote that, how do you know this is what Madeleine Albright said? Well, somebody else has just articulated that, and the individual that did articulate that was Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson on the end of that sort of taped piece that I just played for you. And he was I don't think he had the official title as the Undersecretary, but basically under General Colin Powell, when he was Secretary of State for the United States, Colonel Wilkerson was his right-hand man. So this is a guy who's been at the front of wielding power, and indeed he was his right-hand man when Colin Powell was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so the most powerful military man in the United States. So in both places, this guy has wielded power in the DOD, the Department of Defense, I suppose now it's the Department of War, DOW, and also then in the United States diplomatic processes in the foreign office process, as we would call it in Britain. So the secretaries, as they call it, the Secretariat, they call it the official foreign ministry of the United States. Let's use that terminology, because the differences between the British and the US are somewhat different, but it's about the same. So that's what they've said. So it's quite interesting, isn't it, how the United States perceives itself in these ways. And then in this braggadocious kind of system that has been put in place by Trump, they brag about what they've done. And I think that's the big difference. Look, the United States has always played fast and loose, always carried out regime changes. I do mean always, 85 at the last counting over the last 50 years, regime changes. So more than, more than one a year. So they've always involved themselves in such activities. Since they've been the undisputed leader of the world. They've basically done that all was in the Cold War, and the disputed elements were between them and the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. But now what you're finding is these actions that they carry out are being bragged about on open stages. And it's easy to undermine states. And I mean, coming back to Iran, where we're going to, let's just set you the picture for Iran, and then I'm going to play you another clip so you can get the picture from Iran there. Iran has, we in the United Kingdom, because I like to bring things back to the United Kingdom often, we in the United Kingdom talk about, we're letting refugees in. Why is nobody else taking refugees? Total and utter nonsense. The problem is that that's been played up by our politicians. It's been played up by people like Farage on one side, and indeed the government on the other side, because the government wants to suggest that it's doing more than everybody else, which it isn't. It isn't even doing more than most European countries. But if you take places, and then I always hear it again from people saying, oh, why aren't they taking in their own people? Well, to be fair, and they're talking about the Middle East. So why are Middle Easterners not taking in their own people? Why do we have to have them? Well, the reality is that there's something between 12 and 15 million, I'll say it again, 12 and 15 million Afghan refugees who live in Iran alone. Right? 12 to 15 million. Most of them are undocumented. So in other words, they've come in, they've sneaked in, the Iranians weren't looking to kick them out, and they're making monies however they make it. The documented ones are obviously being paid, like the systems that we pay refugees when they come into your country. But even the undocumented ones can stay in camps and receive food and shelter, etc., etc. But this is where I find it very negative, because these are the same types of peoples that the Mossad is utilised, and that the CIA is utilising, and other Western partners are utilising. The French said they were playing in the game as well, been utilising in order to put them out onto the street in Iran and basically say they're Iranians, and they're paying them money to do that. Break a window, do this, do that, turn over a car, burn stuff, blah, blah. Basic stuff that's been going on forever in our intelligence game. So that is basically what's been happening to try and destroy and collapse the Iranian rial. And the Iranian rial has been collapsed, has the Secretary Besant said. He's right. It has been collapsed. And that's what they're playing on. And then, of course, they're playing into the minorities, the Kurds. They're playing into the Baluch. They're playing into the Azeris, they're playing into the jihadis, who and all of these are being used by Western intelligence services and Mossad in order to inflict damage on Iran. How do I know this? Because it's normal. Because that's what you do. And also, you can take a look at two other regime changes. One that was successful, which was the Maidem coup. And basically, if you look at Maidem, you can see exactly the same which is now happening with Iran. And it worked and it functioned, so that's why they're trying to turn the government. I don't think the Iranian one has worked. I think the Iranians have got control of it, and I think they've got control of it because they've got assistance from the Chinese. So why would the Chinese want to help them? Well, because in Hong Kong in 2019, the West tried the same with Hong Kong. The West did the same situation, heating people up, getting people out on the streets, and for 9 months it was hell to play in Hong Kong. And the vast majority of that was Western-orientated fizzes and fractures created in order to undermine China. Right? China knows this. So China's coming in big and strong to aid Iran to prevent this. Now, where the problem may come about, because you've had Maidem against Russia and you've had Hong Kong against China, what is going to happen when people start demonstrating and coming out on the streets here in the United Kingdom or in parts of Europe? I'll tell you, or in the United States. I'll tell you what's going to happen. Those countries are going to send in their agencies to try and undermine and create the greatest amount of fractures and fizzes and problems for the West. So what we've done is we've unleashed holy hell on ourselves, because now it's open for those countries to actually copy and do the same. So mark my words, this is what's going to happen. And one of the things that Iran was able to get assistance from by the Chinese was to undermine the 40,000 Starlink terminals which were given to the Iranians to cause havoc. The Iranians they put out on the street, okay, by the agencies. So it's all coming around. And then finally, the reason why I'm concentrating on Iran now is because you've got the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier fleet, which is now steaming its way. I think it's in the Malacca Straits now, steaming its way to Iran and the area of Iran. I mean, last week I said that there weren't any carriers within distance. I don't know how they're gonna deal with the potential of Iranian missiles if they're within the close reach of the Iranian coast. I think they've got to be very, very careful there because they could lose a carrier if they get too close to Iran. So I guess that's in the mind of the American DOD, DOW, Department of War now, and definitely naval forces. They've got to be thinking this through. And maybe that's why the delay, because basically Trump's been signalling an attack on Iran and there's been delayed. Now, I got some other info that suggested that the reason for the delay actually wasn't the United States at all, but the reason for the delay was coming from Israel, because the Israelis understand that they're going to have to, first and foremost, undermine, and I'm going to play you, because people have said, how do you know this and where are you getting the info? So I'm going to play you a clip so you can understand it later. So have undermined Israel to a much greater extent than people thought they ever did in that 12-day war. Indeed, it was the fact that Israel was the one that was suing for peace at the end of that 12-day war. Having said that the Israelis attacked the Iranians to start off with on the 13th of June, but then subsequently when they realised how powerful the Iranians were, they were the ones who were suing for peace. And as I mentioned at that stage, Israel's got two real Achilles heels, two real big problems. One is that the vast majority of Israelis have second passports. So they are citizens of another country, right? And so therefore, it's easy for them when things are bad to say, I'm going back to where I've come from, be it Britain, be it the United States, be it even Russia, be it wherever. I'm going back to where I've come from, South Africa, wherever. Australia, wherever it might be, because it's too dangerous now in Israel. Now, when you've got a people who have nowhere to go, they're willing to fight much harder than a people who have somewhere to go. You know, this is what you've got to understand, because who wants to die when you've got options? So this is what you need to understand. So that's a big problem for Israel. And the other big problem for Israel is that Israel has only ever known wars in which it was superior. So now it's going to come into a war where it isn't superior. So it needs the assistance of the United States. So it was suggested, and I don't know this is a fact because I'm not sitting in the Oval Office of the President of the United States or with the President of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, suggested that Netanyahu has been saying to Trump, do not attack Iran yet. Do not attack it yet. Please do not attack it yet. So in other words, the brakes are being put on from Israel rather than the brakes being put on from the United States. But the problem is Trump needs a win. Trump's had losses. He needs a win. And as I said, as a transactional president, wins are what are important. And so I think that the fear of major Iranian retaliation on the Israelis may well be one of the reasons why we haven't had the Trump attack yet. But I think we will have that attack because I think that Trump has got to do something to show a victory. Now, last time he was able to do a deal with the Iranians that basically said, yeah, okay, put a missile down in Qatar. That's fair enough. We'll move our people out before you fire it, and that way we won't need to retaliate against you. But I don't know if there's that goodwill now in this occasion. Well, is it goodwill or is it the fear of Iran to involve itself in a war with the United States and know that it's going to take massive damage and lose a massive number of its citizens? Will be dead. Let's say it for what it is. It's got 90 million people, and they could lose 40 million dead. The other factor is, if no holds are barred, which is what the Iranians are saying, come the next conflict, then and this is the factor we've got to consider, will Iran fire everything it's got, and I do mean everything it's got, at Israel, and thereby, frankly, destroy it? And if that's going to happen, and Israel's finished because it's destroyed, and you figure it out, it's made so many wars, 7 wars is fighting present on 7 different fronts. If it's destroyed, then all of those wars that it's fighting, those people involved in those wars, from the Lebanon to Syria to internal wars with the Palestinians, they will be on a high and they will come at the Israelis. So will Israel then think, okay, let's fire a nuclear weapon at Iran and destroy Iran and teach these people what will happen if you come against us? I would suggest, as Golda Meir said, she was happy to bring the whole lot down. If Israel's going to be lost, Golda Meir said openly on the BBC, we will bring the whole lot down. This is the Samsung directive. This is what will happen if we are going to lose fully and out. Now, to be fair, don't make Israel out to be a big enemy on that, because that's what the United States says, that's what Russia says, that's what China says, that's what everybody with nuclear weapons says. If you come to fully destroy us, we'll destroy you and we'll bring holy hell on everybody. So everybody who has a nuclear weapon, be it India, Pakistan, they all make the same claim. This is our strategic perspective. And that's why the world ends, if we're not careful. So with all those thoughts in mind, I want to play the last clip that I wanted to play you to give you a perspective of why I think we're playing with fire. So that was the end of part 1 of this week's 2-part episode, which you will hear next week. Hope you stay with me and hope you've enjoyed this week's, and we'll get back to the discussion next week. See you then.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.